Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. My boys always kidded me about speaking Tagalog in my southern US accent. So no matter how much we practiced, they always made fun of us. But Filipinos were very kind, of course. So hope you all are doing well, and the program seems to get off on a good start, and I enjoy following and seeing everything that Pastor Nato puts on the Facebook Messenger. So I keep up with you all there. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about trauma in the workplace. And Chaplain Nato actually sent me two resources that he found that I ended up using. And we will give those to you, two websites. And there's a lot of things that you can explore within those two websites. And so the first article that I'll be, I guess, really more or less kind of summarizing the highlights would be from kind of a consultant website called Test Gorilla, and they have all kind of things about human resources, talent assessment, hiring and recruiting, skills-based hiring. But they also did an assignment called workplace trauma. So the causes, signs, and actually from the standpoint of the employer, how to support your employees. And so I'll skip some of that part, but wanted to start with that. And let me just say, as a preface to this, that I don't know the area that you're in or the jobs that you have or have had in the past, um, how much you have, what kind of employer employee relationship. So, this would be work based trauma, either from supervisors or colleagues. But of course, the bigger the work setting, like a factory or a corporation, the bigger it is, the more resources they should have, the employer should have for their employees. And I know here in the States, even if you work at a pharmacy retail, say Walgreens, we have retail pharmacy, CVS, those are all over the United States. And so they have to have a standardized HR program, human resources with benefits for their employees. So that's what I'm talking about. I don't know your setting and what your jobs and your former jobs have been. But I think all of us, maybe in some way or another, have some type of work related trauma, whether it be a more minor trauma or a more major lasting trauma. I know that personally, oh, back before I went to theological seminary for my training as a minister, I was working for a doctor who had just come out of residency and had a very small practice by himself. And so he hired three of us, me to be his assistant, and then one to do the insurance, file the insurance, and one to be the receptionist. And I worked there right after a major life event. Actually, I don't know how many of you know this, but my first husband died. I was only married about 5 years, and then 8 years later, I met Dr. Flint. And so I started working for this doctor, and I was, of course, depressed over in my grief journey. But I had some experience that he was looking for without hiring a regular licensed RN. And so I ended up, long story short, about a year and a half into that job, I ended up being let go. And there was no specific reason, but that I was told, but it was devastating. And then about 8 months later, I felt God calling me into full time Christian ministry, and therefore I prepared to go to seminary. So that was the instance that I thought about, a personal experience. Another one was we came to the Philippines with an organization with American Baptists called International Ministries, and I was hired part time and doing some chaplaincy work. And I worked for 5.5 years, but then they had a consultant come in to see how they could restructure or use because money was, as with everything, was short, and they needed to know how to manage for the future. And so they basically, uh, I didn't really have any notice, but my job was cut. I was helping recruit and process and train missionaries. So it was devastating. It took me over a year to get over that. And then along the way, I've had, looking back, I realized I had some harassment when I was younger, um, of a real sexual nature, actually. And I was so naive. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do. So I guess, generally speaking, maybe each of us has had some kind of run in with other workmates or supervisors that seemed very stressful, hard to negotiate, what to do. So, this is going to be talking about that a little bit. And in the past year, I did a lot with mental health issues. And so, really, work related trauma, that they've identified it as that work related trauma, can actually cause some real anxiety, depression, mental health issues, and just a, a burnout, what they call a burnout. And if the person has not been let go, that's experiencing these traumas, then it starts to lead to symptoms and behavior which affect their work. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. The worst part, I don't know in the Philippines, but here in the States, the worst part is that workplace trauma, I would say, is largely unacknowledged. Now, I will say the hospital that I work at is owned by a big corporation. And so it's not a government or city run hospital. And that's the way a lot of the hospitals are here in the States, except maybe real rural hospitals. There are some private hospitals, but largely it's corporations. And so we have a huge HR department, and we have lots of resources. And there is more, I've been there 10.5 years, but there's been more and more openness to work related or employee trauma. And they also have a very um, good policy about these things I'm going to name that are part of work related trauma. So there's a program set up and it's very organized. But in small businesses or other places like doctor's office, dentist, stores, retail stores, to be an employee in that kind of setting, I'm not sure, especially over there in the Philippines. So I just wanted to give you that frame of reference in case some of this really doesn't help you. I hope it does. Nato and I talked and decided that this would be the first trauma that I would give a didactic on. So, with that being said, what is workplace trauma, or really, it's almost can be post traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, because trauma is something that impacts a person's being, personhood, and life. And even the brain has to integrate the impact and the trauma that was experienced, and it kind of goes through this process to store it as memory. So the emotional component or the emotional aspect of any impact of any trauma is stored in the brain. So it can be PTSD, although the word workplace trauma is not currently defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or it's called capital letters DSM 5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. But more and more recently, I would assume across the major first world countries at least, that the workplace trauma has been more identified and gaining more attention. So there's referenced in this article that I studied a Dr. Chichi Obuyawa, Obuaya, Obuawa. He is a, or she is a no, my apologies. He is a psychiatrist and a mental health professional, and he's hesitant to relate workplace trauma directly to clinically defined PTSD. But he acknowledges that the disorder causes real damage and may be closer to severe anxiety or depression. So, this workplace trauma, the disorder causes real damage to the person and may be closer to a clinically defined severe anxiety or depression. So, what are the causes of workplace trauma? Workplace trauma is caused by the inability to cope with negative events or abuse at work, which can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter their social economic status, their background. It can happen to anyone. And many factors come into play, such as a person's emotional health that they have before the trauma, their emotional resilience, ability to be resilient in the face of stress and trauma, the amount of control that they feel they have over the situation, and very important is their outside support, outside the work environment, their support during a stressful time. So all of these factors can come into play, that cause that can help a person survive or overcome workplace trauma. Um, and there are a lot of situations and events and people that can be common causes at work that can stress a person. And of course, everybody handles the unique situation differently. So even if one person has been through a similar thing, such as verbal abuse or harassment, and but they can't really judge another person's experience that has been through harassment. They can say, I've been through something like that, but individuals handle it differently, along with some of the cultural worldview of each culture. So some of the common causes of workplace trauma are verbal abuse or harassment from supervisor or workmates, colleagues, bullying, which can take different forms, mostly emotional, mental, verbal, job insecurity, being laid off, sudden role responsibility changes with a person's job that just they're not expecting, toxic workplace culture where there it's just negativity and people are toxic in their relating to others, and so it becomes very difficult. Harassment or verbal abuse is being yelled at or talked to in a very demeaning way or patronized, where a person that's over you or someone that works alongside you acts like they're better than you are and talk down to you also. So, job insecurity is when you feel insecure about possibly losing your job, and when you start seeing people being laid off around you, and or maybe your job will be obsolete, like mine was, my part time job. It just causes a feeling of inadequacy, anxiety, fear. So, job insecurity can cause workplace trauma. Sudden roles or changes are having to do with all of a sudden an abrupt change in activity or role or responsibility of what the person has been doing. There's been an abrupt change. So that can cause a person to be impacted and stressed, of course, and insecure. And then serious injury or death of a colleague. That can be either witnessing or being involved in a colleague or workmate's an accident on the job or injury, or even someone has a heart attack that's working alongside a person, and or a stroke or something sudden like that that results in death. And so if you're there in that work environment and you witness that and experience that, it can cause trauma. Natural disasters on the job, which would be something like a fire, an explosion, earthquake, um, typhoon in your setting, or a hurricane here in the States. And it's close by the work environment, or even affects the work environment, the building, or whatever. And then job roles that deal with tragedy and death a lot. So, for example, doctors, nurses, EMTs, rescue workers, first responders, they experience a lot of work trauma that usually require some counseling, some maybe at times some medication. Signs of workplace trauma would be things like absenteeism, where workers miss work and they don't show up because of stress, anxiety, or just avoiding the stress and trauma that happened at work. A limited ability to build relationships or work as a team because of the trauma, that's a sign of an employee that they are withdrawn and they can't communicate and work with others. Um, Anxiety, workplace PTSD can cause intrusive thoughts, jitters, nervousness, low concentration, and physical anxiety symptoms such as nausea, fatigue, hyperventilating. So, high anxiety symptoms are from the job trauma. Insomnia, that's where you can't sleep and there's a lot of emotional instability and paranoia and fear, and memory loss can also occur with insomnia. Burnout, people with workplace PTSD or trauma are much more prone to be exhausted and more apathetic, where they just don't care as much, and very, very stressed. And a few more signs of trauma of an employee is depression. So, with any type of clinical depression, there's usually a loss of meaning, motivation, or joy, and just numbness to life. And it's a consequence of usually a workplace trauma, but it really shows there at work, obviously. And then another sign is when an employee or worker feels undervalued or and just lost, just drifting. They have workers or employees have a loss of confidence, um, little or no workplace respect, um, and to them, people being respectful, their supervisor, manager, workmates, peers being respectful to them, and a feeling of worthlessness. Um, Unexplained burst of anger or aggression. Workplace trauma can lead to bouts or phases of irritability, which usually is a lighter symptom of anger and frustration. And then these episodes will be without any reason, they just come on. But it is a sign or symptom of workplace trauma. And withdrawal and reduced productivity. So they're more detached from their uh, work task, from their roles, whether that be, a supervisor or managerial role, even, or just their performance and quality of their work is diminished. So you can see from these symptoms and signs that not only does workplace trauma affect the worker, but subsequently the business, the employer, uh, it affects the business, the company as well. So it will pay for the employer to have some things in place to support workplace trauma, and to have a more positive environment so that people feel comfortable and can trust sharing their struggles, their stress, their problems, even with coworkers, if nothing else, to vent. So, and it's just the right thing to do for an employer to support their employee. So I'm going to skip over the things that, you know, how employers can uh, turn around the effect of workplace trauma and support their employees. But it is on this website, and there's a lot of different links that are very interesting that I explored. But for time and for your purposes, I'm going to skip that. I do think that whenever there is an environment between manager, supervisor, boss, and employees where the employees know that their supervisor really, truly, genuinely cares about them and their work, their livelihood, and that they want to be supportive in times of undue stress and life stress that they may bring to work. But these workplace traumas are usually the impact of something there at work, either with the business or the supervisor or colleagues. But it's a good idea for employers to be proactive, to ask the employee, like in a one-on-one meeting, do you need support right now? Or, I'm here if you want to talk. What can I do to help you? So those are things that are the ideal that you would hope that any employer does. Um, and the whole idea of destigmatizing mental health issues in employment. I don't know about there in the Philippines, but here in the States, especially after COVID, the mental health issues and patients has just skyrocketed. And so nowadays it's a little bit more open and not stigma. It's not a stigma as much to say I have a mental health or a mental health disorder, and this is what I'm doing about it. And people can still get hired on, where before, if someone knew, 30 years ago, even 40, that you had bipolar, they might not want to hire you. But it's almost, oh, I don't want to say it's common, but it's just every time I turn around, someone's saying, they've been diagnosed with bipolar. So I don't know what the statistic would be of the people that have mental health disorders, but it's very high. And so most companies, employers should create that environment where it's not to be stigma to have trauma or long-term stress, or it's workplace trauma is more than just stress. It's a trauma, and so it affects how a person copes and lives. And then, of course, there are our workmates that may have toxic personalities and interpersonal relationship issues. And I know a lot of places do have employee assistant programs where they contract out counselors. And so if an employee needs counseling, or just even one time, two times, 3 visits, that is a resource. And our hospital has a very good one, employee assistant program. So I think also to keep in mind, depending on how severe and how long the workplace trauma has gone on, um, especially in a bigger work setting, that employers should consider helping that person recover from just like PTSD, and having maybe initially a more flexible work hours schedule if they need to work from home or an internet cafe, or I don't know, other settings, or if they are doing the type of work that they work on computers. But going back into a setting where there's been a trauma is often hard, especially if it's a major, major trauma. So, anyway, those are some of the ideas and concepts and suggestions that this article talked about. And then I noticed that they talked about critical incident stress debriefing and following a traumatic event. So if there were like say an earthquake, a fire, or a death on the job, or something like that, there could be a critical incident stress debriefing soon after the event happened, so that people can talk about and process their experiences as a group. And we do that at our hospital. And in fact, the chaplains are trained to facilitate those with nurses, doctors, other medical staff. And often I've done that to lead a critical incident stress debriefing. So anyway, that's an idea, and you do that in CPE classes as well, in your IPR groups, and talking, debriefing. Not only do you study and talk about verbatims, but debriefing experiences that you've had at the hospital. And it's kind of like that. So I think the goal is for employers, companies, businesses to create a safer environment to reduce the risk of workplace trauma, and to support those who suffer from workplace trauma or workplace PTSD. So, in summary, some of the most traumatizing things a person can experience actually can happen in the workplace. And we maybe don't think about that at first, but it's really true. And it could either be a natural disaster, a workplace violence, layoffs, job losses. All of those have a traumatic effect on a person. And you probably don't experience over there, I would guess, but over here, workplace violence and these mass gun shootings are just, I can't believe we have this in the United States, honestly. But to experience that firsthand has got to be very traumatic. Um, and then you've got the more pervasive, targeted actions that happen at work, discrimination while at work, the harassment, the verbal abuse, the things that I've listed before. Um, let's see, let me go back to name them again. I'm sorry. Accidents or injuries, serious injury or death of a colleague, violence or physical abuse, even, and bullying. I'm sure that happens a lot there, maybe as much as it does here. Being laid off, job insecurity. I know I hear a lot that some companies or businesses will talk about needing to lay off people, and really the true motivation sometimes can be to make their employees have more motivation to work harder and to be more dependable. And so, but it's scary when, people, even bosses, even start talking about job security or laying people off. So those are some of the things that we talked about. And I think that when a person goes through that, or you're working with a person who's experienced any kind of trauma at work, then maybe you can first go back and realize what that might have been, if you can remember, for you, and emotionally the feelings, the impact, the how it uh, limited your daily life, and then you can identify more with the person you're working with, or if you're having it happen to you, the need for support, and especially the more painful the experience, counseling is highly advised, and support, any kind of support group. Over here, a lot of times the employer can kind of get away with saying, oh, the employee is not doing his or her job, and hiding behind that. And so, it can be very tough, very, very tough. And that's why it's called a trauma. And especially if a person feels stuck, or the stress accumulates. And so, um, it's difficult to even survive. If you've ever been let go, or lost a job, you might remember how long it takes to regroup from that. And you want to feel the need to get your reputation back. You might take it to legal matters, just lots of tears, sadness, loss. It's a grief when you lose a job, whether it's because of reorganization, or because of the boss doesn't give you a reason, or you have been warned but not really told specifically what you need to change. So I wanted to also, before we close, go over a couple of things that can help. But this other website is called Living Unapologetically. It is a diversity, um, equality, inclusive consulting agency, DEI. And the person who is running it is a licensed social work. She looks Filipino, so that would be a really good resource for you. And she also has devotions. So she, you can listen to them when you go on the website and click, or you can get the transcript. And right now she's got 3 on there, and I was going to name those for you, and you just put in your email and you can get them free. One of them is called Disrupt Your Shame Spiral and Be Present with Feedback. So it's a transformative guided meditation with music that unravels the grip of shame that comes when we receive um, critical or negative feedback. And it says you will be invited to replace your negative emotions with self-compassion and acceptance. And there's deep breathing and introspection, and it eventually helps you to foster growth and deeper connection and not go into a denial of how you're really feeling and what you're going through, but to have more positive coping skills. And so it sounded really, really good. And then another one was called Claiming Worthiness in the Face of Discrimination. So when you feel discriminated against, and it's a guided meditation thing also, that helps you not feel so alone and visualize a circle of support made up of people who provide you strength, and then receive the affirmations your heart needs, speaking to your worth, your identity, and resilience while facing discrimination. So that's one. And then there's one more that's on the website right now, Moving into Discomfort, a guided meditation to prepare for difficult conversations. So, to prepare you emotionally and mentally for challenging conversations, with honoring your emotions without seeking immediate answers. So, you become aware of your bodily sensations and, deep breathing exercises to release unhelpful thoughts and feelings. Again, it invites self-compassion and self-love, encouragement, positive statements. So those are a few resources I wanted to bring your attention to. But as we close, this website, she had these things to help you heal from workplace trauma and its lasting effects. Give yourself space to finally feel everything, because when you're going through the trauma, and even immediately after you leave a workplace, a person is still in crisis mode. And so doing whatever to survive. But when you're in a place where you can have that mental and emotional and spiritual space to be present to, and then to let yourself feel and try to understand your emotions and try to process those. So it's important to do that. And if you want to do that with someone that you trust, is also good. Journaling, activities with a best friend, talking about it, and also seeing a mental health professional is a good idea. The second thing is to talk through things with people who get it. So most of us have people that we feel like are in our corner and have our back. But it's also important to find someone to talk to who's gone through the similar circumstance that you have with workplace trauma, and on that deeper level that can say, I can understand, I can appreciate rather, the dynamics of what you experienced. So whether that be racial discrimination or gender discrimination or verbal abuse, sexual harassment, whatever it might be, but be very intentional about seeking out someone who can really appreciate what you've been through, because they've been through similar circumstances. Figure out which direction you want to go after you have processed your emotions and you've connected with the right people, to think about your options of your next direction, your next pathway, and to look at yourself to see what unhealthy patterns that you might want to address. Working as a team, working with colleagues, working with authority, your supervisor, manager, to look at things that might not have occurred to you when all of this was going on. So to be present and mindful of those things. And then center on your purpose in life. So you've gone through a trauma, you've gone through the impact, the effects of that. You've looked at yourself, you've talked to a counselor, a pastor, you've shared with a friend, you've journaled about your feelings, how it's affected your life. And then after time, center on your purpose again in life. Because this workplace trauma can just decenter us, knock us off our feet, so to speak. And so to refocus your energy and your goals of what's most important to you. And she gives a reference. I'm not sure who this person is, but it's MEI Fox's article on Forbes. Mimi Fox's article on Forbes. And I suppose that's Forbes magazine, Forbes, about ways to discover your life purpose. Of course, as a Christ follower, in our Christian faith, we know the number one purpose in our life, to serve God, to live and walk with Him, and to witness. But in terms of a vocation or work, livelihood, what would that be after this trauma or leaving a workplace? And the whole thing of just acceptance and letting go, lifelong task, that we all are wounded healers, and the pathway, the process of healing, is not just an overnight healing. It's a journey, and so be aware of your triggers. Even when people go into another job, they'll think, oh no, well, that same thing happened again. Well, I have a terrible supervisor, unfair, unjust. Am I gonna, be harassed or demeaned, or those triggers can come back again. So just pay attention to your needs and validate them for yourself, and do what you can to meet those needs, and know that rebuilding, you'll be a stronger person in the healing and the rebuilding. So I hope this has helped, and it's probably a little bit longer than I had planned it to be. So Chaplain Nato, you do whatever you need to do if you want to divide it. So I pray for you all as you learn and grow, and may God bless you on your journeys. Bye-bye until next time.